So, good morning to everybody. I didn't understand anything that you were talking about previously. Okay, my name is Chris Panoukakis. I'm coming from Greece, and you know how's the weather in Greece this time, eh? We have something like there is no snow yet. We have something like 13 degrees. So every time we have a weather like this, the family has to go into a meeting to decide if the kids will go to school next day. Okay, so it's a little bit strange for me to see all the cars that go around in the city without any fear of the snow. Okay, and the other funny thing is I asked the girls at the basement, where are the session rooms? And they sent me to the toilet. Okay, never mind. I managed to find my way up here. So, this session is about Windows Server 2012. How hot can it be? Show me. And we will see some of the, let's say, best marketing features of Windows Server 2012. I've tried to do a selection of all these new things that came with Windows Server 2012. Who is using now Windows Server 2012 in production environments? Well, some of you, okay? And if you want, you can follow my Twitter account here or my blog. You can still find some articles written in English. The content is in Greek, but I usually write a lot of things in English also. Okay, so I'm a Microsoft certified trainer since the year 2000. Actually, remember my first Microsoft exam was Windows NT Server version 4 back in 1998. And I'm an MVP since the year 2008. My, let's say, specialization is Active Directory. And I'm also a member of something strange called STEP. What is this? It's the Springboard Technical Experts Panel. Have you ever visited the Springboard website? www.microsoft.com/springboard is a Microsoft community that deals with the desktop technologies. Not exactly the server technologies, but the desktop technologies. So, I usually travel to teach courses, to present sessions like this. And you know, the last time I went back to my company, at my desk, there was no chair. Because this happens when you are outside of the company a lot of times. Somebody goes and grabs your chair. Okay, so let's go on. As I told you, this session is about some of the new hot features of Windows Server 2012. We cannot cover everything. The product is huge. We will see a few things about Hyper-V, networking, Active Directory, Windows PowerShell, and of course there are a lot of new features. I've tried to create a list, and this is the list of all the new features of Windows Server 2012. Take a look at this. It's amazing, really. Okay. It will stop after a while, but you can get the idea of what's new in this operating system. So, one of the first things that somebody sees when tries to install Windows Server 2012 is this. First of all, there is no difference between the features of the standard and the data center edition. It doesn't matter what you install, you have the same exact features. That means that you can go for a failover cluster even if you install the standard edition. This is good because you have to pay less. Do you remember how expensive was the data center edition in the past? It's still expensive, but you don't need it really if you want to build some, let's say, exotic features like failover clusters. Okay, and the next thing is to decide if you want to use the graphical user interface or the server core version. Do you remember Windows Server 2008 R2? You had to decide. If you need the GUI, you have to install the GUI and that's all. What if you need to go to server core? You have to decide to install server core and that's it. Now, you have the option to change it from the full graphical user interface environment to the server core environment anytime you like. Okay, so practically you do not have to choose. Let's take a look at this. Okay, can you hear me? I think you can hear me. I'm going to start to use my virtual machines here. By the way, this is the Windows 8, and it offers me a full Hyper-V environment. And this is very good because you can actually build your own labs and demos by using the real Hyper-V thing and not toys like, I don't want to say that, okay? Like Virtual PC. It was good for labs, but it was not so good really. So I can connect to this virtual machine. This has the full graphical user interface. And if you go to Server Manager, you can simply go and remove the feature. What feature? Let me show you. You go to Manage, remove roles and features, and you select the server, and you remove this. Let me zoom a little bit so you can see, you guys in the back can see better. Let me do this. Okay. So take a look at this. This is the graphical user interface. If you remove it, you have a server core environment. This is the server graphical cell. If you remove this one, you have you remove the full GUI. This is the full graphical interface, and these are only the tools. So practically you have two options. You can remove everything, or you can remove the graphical user interface environment and leave only the tools, Server Manager. So you have a server core version, but anytime you need, you have the Server Manager console, so you can go and change the settings. So now I'm going to remove everything. Just remove it. Okay. Restart the server if required, and you just click remove. We will wait a little bit for these features to be removed. It doesn't take a lot of time. Maybe the only bad thing is you need a restart. But okay, feature is removed. A few more seconds to go. And here we are. The server now restarts automatically. Do you use server core? Nobody. Yes, because it's good and sweet to do the job by using the mouse. Nobody wants to write commands, of course. But it's a good idea because if you use the server core version, or if you transform your server in a server core version, you have less updates, and this is a good thing. Okay, we're almost ready, I think. Okay, let's log on to see what's going on here. And here you are. You have a server core version, just with a restart. Okay. Let me revert this virtual machine back to the... I've created a snapshot in Hyper-V just to show you how things look like if you have only Server Manager. Okay, so I will apply this snapshot now. And this is what you get when you have only server manager. Okay. I've removed only the server graphical cell. Okay. And you have something like this. Can you see this? Just the command prompt because it's a server core version, but every time you need it, server manager is here, and you can use it to go and add roles and features to your server. Okay. So let's leave this virtual machine open and go back to our slides. A few things, not so technical, about this new Microsoft Metro desktop, whatever you like. What do you think of this? Do you like it?
It's very good.
It's very, sorry?
Very good.
Well, maybe it's not a good idea to have it on a server, but it's not so bad after all. I mean, if you know a few shortcuts, if you know that if you press the Windows key, you go to this Metro start menu, which will not call it Metro, Microsoft says now. Okay, they can soon if they want. You can use the Windows key plus C to open the charms. This is the charms bar, okay, or you can move your mouse down here. And with the Windows plus I, you go to the settings, directly to these settings up here. And with the Windows plus Q, you go to the search. And if you move your mouse down here, you go to the new desktop. One thing that you should keep in mind is this. If you have this new, let's say, Metro version of Windows Server 2012, don't panic. Just type the command. Okay, you are lucky because when you start the server, you don't go directly to this new screen. But if you press the flag, the Windows logo on your keyboard, you have something like this. Usually, when you go and install tools and features on your server, you can find these icons here. You can see group policy management because it's a domain controller, Windows Server Backup, or you have the server manager, or you have Windows PowerShell control panel, and so on. How can I get a command prompt? This is what my student asked me. Oh my God, I need a command prompt. Where is this? Just type it. CMD. You just type it, you press enter, and here you are. It's not so bad. Just type the command that you need. Okay. Some guys say, where is the start menu? But there is a start menu, only you have to know where to find it. If you click the Windows logo in the X, let me zoom a little bit so you can see it. You have this one. This is a new start menu. You go to Programs and Features, Power Options, Viewer System, Device Manager, and so on. So you can find the things that you need in order to do the job. Okay. One student told me the previous week, well, it's not for everyday use. It's only for weekends. It's when you do not have anything else to do. You just play with this one. Okay, because I cannot find the tools that I need. But everything is there. Don't panic. The easiest thing to do, just go and type. What do you need? Even if you do not see it here, just go and type control panel. Here it is. And you get the admin's tools also as a gift. Okay. So, that's it more or less about the new version, let's say, of the GUI, of the operating systems. Sorry. Here we are. And of course we have the new server manager. Okay, some guys say it's a little bit slow. It's not a fast tool. It needs time to refresh. It needs time to get information. This is because everything is on PowerShell. Everything that you see on Server Manager is based on PowerShell commands. Okay, so you have to give some time to these PowerShell commands to run actually. So the good thing here is you can use Server Manager to configure multiple servers. So this is why Microsoft calls Windows Server 2012 as a cloud operating system. Okay, you don't need to go and change servers and consoles and remote desktop to the first machine, then the remote desktop to the second one, and so on to do the configuration. Okay, you can also go and create server groups. My DHCP servers, my member servers, my domain controllers. These could be server groups. Or you can get information about every server that you have on your network, just from a single place. When you see the green color is good, red is bad, so you will see these things right now. So you have an idea of if you have some errors on a specific computer. Or you can even launch PowerShell remotely. Just select the server, right click and start a PowerShell session. Or you can even install Server Manager locally on your computer with Windows 8. Take a look at this. This is my Windows 8 computer and this is Server Manager. Of course I will not be able to connect to anywhere now, but just for you to see it, this is my local Windows 8 Server Manager. So, if you are connected in your company's network, you can use this tool to manage everything. Take a look at this, all servers, okay. And actually, it's not connected now, but you can get the idea. These are my two domain controllers, okay. So you can do a remote administration just by using your Windows 8 computer. Let's take a look at this Server Manager. This is not the virtual machine that I want to use. Okay, this is the virtual machine that I want to use. Take a look at this. I have, first of all, the dashboard. So you can do some very simple things by using these tasks. Add roles and features to any server in the network. Or add other servers that you want to manage just from this Server Manager console. Or create a server group. And this is actually what I did. If you go to domain controllers, you can see nothing here. Okay, usually you should see these two computers. It's empty, so you can go and search in Active Directory. Let me zoom a little bit. You can search for all computers that you have in the company, actually. This is even a Windows 8 machine. So, I've created a group called Domain Controllers. So, now it's a good idea to go and add my two domain controllers in this group. Okay, so I will select them and I will add them to the group. Okay, and here we are. Server Manager will connect to both computers. I will get some very useful information like the IP address of these computers, and I get even the events from these two machines. Okay. So you can get the idea of what's going on about the errors and events in the event viewer just from this console. Okay, you can even check the performance of these computers. Okay, as soon as you leave these servers running, you will get something like this, a line that will display you the CPU usage or the available memory. Okay. Of course, if you want to see this, you have to go and start the performance counter because they are not automatically started. Okay, just right click and select Start Performance Counters, as simple as this. Okay, it should be down here, Start Performance Counters and Start Performance Counters for this server. Okay, I've created another group called Member Servers, and I have just one server here. I can go and add one more. So, edit server group, search in Active Directory for servers, and add this computer also. Okay. So now I have a member servers group and my two servers. Okay. What else? If you go to the local server, you have also some good information here about computer name, the domain of this computer. Let me zoom a little bit. What about your firewall, remote management, remote desktop, NIC teaming? We will talk about NIC teaming in a while. The IP address of this computer, updates, this Internet Explorer setting that doesn't allow you to visit web pages. So this is the place to go and switch it off. This is something that everybody wants to do. I don't know why. Okay, so, and if I select this server and you right click, take a look at what you can do remotely. These are remote actions that you can do because I'm not logged on to DC2 now, I'm logged on to DC1. So I can add roles and features remotely. I can restart the server, computer management, remote desktop connection. Windows PowerShell, are you kidding? You can establish a remote PowerShell session just like this. Windows PowerShell. And here you are. You are connected to the second domain controller remotely, and you can start typing PowerShell commands. Very, very easy thing to do. Okay. So, if you want to add roles and features, you start the wizard, select which server you want to use for this role installation or for this feature installation. But take a look at this. Select a virtual hard disk. That's interesting. Let's take a look at this. I don't want to install a role or a feature on a server. I want to install a feature on a virtual hard disk. What is this? If you select this one, you have two options. You can select a VHD from a network share, or you can select an offline VHD file. So, I've created my VHD file. I have a Windows Server 2012 installation on this. I have somewhere this VHD file, but I forgot to include the role. I don't need to start a virtual machine. I don't need to create a virtual machine, install the role, and destroy the virtual machine after this just to keep the VHD file. You can just inject the roles and features that you need to do in an offline VHD file. Okay, so if you have a virtual machine, if you have, let's say, a template, a VHD template, and you want to install additional roles and features, you do not need to create a virtual machine just for this. You can go and inject the roles in this VHD file. Okay. So, let's move on to slides here. PowerShell is now better and bigger. I will show you why it's better, but I cannot show you why it's bigger. I can tell you why it's bigger. It's because we have something like 3,000 additional commandlets in respect to the previous version, to Windows Server 2008 R2. So, who uses PowerShell? 1, 2, 3. Don't be shy. It's funny because the first hand comes up, then the second one, then the third one. Okay, if you use PowerShell, you will like this. If you don't use PowerShell, it's a good idea to start learning it. And now you have the instructor here, a built-in instructor that can guide you to this PowerShell environment. Okay, let me show you just a simple command in PowerShell. Usually, you can start PowerShell by clicking on this button. Okay, and you can start typing commands like this. Sorry. Well, get AD user minus identity administrator. Okay. You can see that if you type a command related to Active Directory, the Active Directory module is loaded automatically. This was not true in Windows Server 2008 R2. You had to go to PowerShell and type the command import module Active Directory. Now, Windows Server 2012 understands that you want to play with Active Directory objects, so loads that module automatically. But what if you do not know how to type this command? Okay, and maybe this is the only command I know. But we can go to Windows PowerShell Integrated Scripting Environment. Where is it? Just type it. Windows PowerShell. Here you are. Integrated Scripting Environment. This is more or less like a Notepad. It's not a Notepad, it's a PowerShell and Notepad, something in between. The cool thing about this is, as soon as you start to type, you get a list. And this is very, very useful. So, get, and this is everything that you can type with the get command. Get AD computer. Where is the get AD user command? I can go and scroll a little bit down here. Get AD user. Where is this? Something here. Come on. AD. Okay. Let's scroll down here. Get AD user. Here you are. Yes, but what's next? You have to specify the username. Minus, yes, minus what? Minus identity. Okay. So more or less we can find our way when we type a PowerShell command, and if this is not enough, you can go to the help down here. Okay. You just type the command get AD user, and you have the option here. You have the real command, and it will give you details, and also you can download the entire help file. Now I do not have an internet connection, so I cannot do it, but you can download additional help files that Microsoft creates in respect to PowerShell commands. If this is the command that you can use, you can just insert it down here, get AD user, minus, again I can go and find the identity, and user administrator. Okay. So, please start learn PowerShell. It will be very useful in the future. Okay. DHCP failover, another one. Do you remember we used to say what happens if you have two DHCP servers? And all these years we used to teach the students to split the scope 80% on the first DHCP server, 20% on the second DHCP server. Okay, so there is no need to do this anymore because DHCP servers can communicate. Okay, and we have two modes for this: the load balance or the hot standby. What is the load balance? Just install two DHCP servers, and these DHCP servers will communicate and will load balance automatically. Okay, both of them will have the same scope of IP addresses, and both of them they will give IP addresses to the clients. Okay, it will never overlap, and they will keep the balance. Or you can go for the hot standby mode. What is this? The first DHCP server is active, is up and running, and the second one is sleeping. If the first DHCP server goes down, the second DHCP server will start automatically and will service the client. Let's take a look at this. It's a very easy thing to do, and I will connect to my first DHCP server. Here we are. I will go to DHCP. Where is DHCP? Just type it, guys. Don't panic, as I told you. Just type the command. Okay, so this is my first DHCP server, and let me show you this. You can go to the IP version 4 scope, Let me zoom a little bit. And you just select configure failover here. Okay. Configure failover. What is the scope that you want to failover? This one. Okay. I have only one scope. Just click next. And here you have to go and specify the second DHCP server that you want to failover. Okay. My second server is dc2.condozo.com. It's already configured as a DHCP server, but with nothing else. There are no scopes on this DC2, on this second DHCP server. It just sits there and waits for me to go and configure failover. So I will select this one, my second DHCP server. Okay, click next, and here is the good part. This is the load balance mode, and you can configure it like this, 50-50. Okay, both of them will work. Let's say if you have 100 clients in your company, 50 of them will get an IP address from the first DHCP server, and 50 of them will get the IP address from the second DHCP server. Okay, but the interesting thing is this one, hot standby. Okay, and this is the settings that you need. I will zoom so you can see it better. Here we are, hot standby. Okay, and as soon as the first DHCP server goes down, the state switchover interval will be 1 minute. Practically after 1 minute, more or less, the second DHCP server will see that the first one is down and will start servicing the clients. The only thing that you have to configure this is a search secret. I've typed the word test. You can type something complicated if you want in your network, but it's just a, let's say, a search secret. It will allow these two DHCP servers to communicate securely. So, I just want to show you my second DHCP server. It's this one. Let me log on. So, where is DHCP? Just type it, guys. Don't panic, as I told you. Okay, this is my second DHCP server. You can see that I have no scopes on this one. Okay. It's just authorized to Active Directory, so it can start the service, but nothing else, no scopes here. Now, as soon as you configure the failover here, and you click Finish, you get the message that the scopes are added on the partner server. Okay, disable scopes if you have any, create a failover configuration, everything is successful. Okay, I can go on and check the second DHCP server. If I refresh a little bit here, come on, refresh, it needs, okay, take a look at this. And I can move this to machines. Here. Okay, this is the first one, this is the second one. You can see that everything is replicated, and both of them have the same IC addresses list. They know that I have 3 computers and 3 address lists. Let's bring down this first one. Let's say that my first DHCP server stops for some reason. I'm going to stop the service. Okay. Of course you cannot find the DHCP server you see because there is no service, but here, if you refresh it, you can see this strange symbol here. that means that we're now running in failover mode. So the second DHCP server will continue servicing your network as before. Okay. And that's it more or less. You can go and bring the first DHCP server up again. And after a while, if you refresh everything, you will see that the original server will continue. Okay. Everything as before. Okay. So, a very good idea if you have two servers, two DHCP servers in your network. Okay. And this was the DHCP failover. One other thing that we can do, NIC teaming, network interface card teaming. Have you ever used this one on servers in production environments? Some of you, yes. Now you can do it just like this. It doesn't matter what is the vendor of the network interface cards. It could be an Intel card, different model, different vendor. You just do the teaming from within Server Manager. Okay, let me show you this. This is cool because you can use it on every server with multiple network adapter cards. Okay, my virtual machine for teaming is this one. Okay. You go to local server, Server Manager, and you can see that the teaming is now disabled. Okay, if you want to enable it, you just click on this option here. Immediately you can see what are the adapters that you have. I've changed the name so I can remember that I want to team these two adapters and not the first one, because the first one is for the normal server communication. So you just go to tasks and create new team. You give a name, team 1, and you select the network adapter card that you want to participate in the team. Okay, very, very easy thing to do. You just click OK, and the team is created. The only thing that I have here, since I'm using virtual machines, is my first adapter is active, the second one is not active, because actually here my second adapter is my wireless network adapter card and there is no network connected right now. If you use regular cables and network adapters, real network adapters, you will see that the team is created. And if you go here to the network connection, to the adapters, you will see that you have one more network adapter card. This is your new teamed card. Okay, these are the adapters that participate, and this is created. Okay, so the good thing here is you don't need special hardware to do it. Okay, and if you want to just delete the team, you can do it very easily. Just delete it and things are as before. Okay. Okay, let's go on. We talked about teaming, Hyper-V improvements. A lot of things here. More live migrations. What is a live migration? I have two nodes in a cluster. I have the storage, and I can migrate a virtual machine from the first node of the cluster to the second without downtime. Okay, in Windows Server 2008 R2, you could do only one live migration at a time. Now you can do more than one. It depends on the hardware that you use. Okay, you can do also live migrations without the storage, only by using SMB3. What is SMB3? The new server message block protocol. Now we are in version 3. This practically means you can store your virtual machine on a shared folder on the network. So you don't need storage anymore. Just use a network path / file server / virtual machine for the storage and for the files of the virtual machine. Or you can move the entire storage of a virtual machine to a different location. You can move an entire virtual machine without using a storage, and all these things, they do not need to turn off the virtual machine. Okay, the virtual machine is up and running. The users will not understand anything. You can move the storage, you can move the virtual machine with no real downtime. And the killer feature is the Hyper-V replica. Okay, you can replicate an entire virtual machine to a different Hyper-V server just by using the internet maybe. So you can easily go and create disaster recovery scenarios. My location is in Bratislava and I have a replica site in Vienna. So I can quickly replicate this virtual machine just by using the internet. Okay. So let's take a look at this. It was very difficult for me to bring an entire, let's say, cluster here. Okay, so I created the entire infrastructure in my lab back in Greece, and I have some videos for you. You will see the first one is move the virtual machine storage to a network share with no downtime. Think about it. I want to move the VHD file to a file server. Just move it to a different location. And the virtual machine has no downtime at all. Let's take a look at this. This is my production here. I can open with Windows Media Player. So, this is my virtual machine. If you go to the settings, you can see that it's local. It's on my drive C. Okay. And you can check it here. This is my folder called number 2. And this is my VHD file. Okay. I can go to Hyper-V Manager. First I will ping the virtual machine continuously so you can see that you will have no real downtime. Okay. And I will go to Hyper-V Manager and I will move what? Let's see the wizard. Move the entire virtual machine or just move the storage. I will move the storage to a single location. Okay. And take a look at this. It's a normal file share, not a real storage. Okay. And as soon as you click finish, you move the entire storage to a different computer. Let's see if you have connection problems while the move is done. Okay. Performing the move. I still have network in the virtual machine. Let's see. Okay, the move is done, almost. No timeout. The virtual machine is up and running. Okay. Let's check the location of the VHD file. Take a look at this. It's actually moved. Okay. And you don't need a storage for this. You can use a simple file server with Windows Server 2012. Okay. So, I think we should go to the next one. Okay. The next one is this. Okay, let me show you. The next scenario. Live migration of a virtual machine without a storage with no downtime. Live migration. Maybe you did use live migrations all these years with Windows Server 2008 R2, but you had to use a storage. Maybe a dedicated storage from Hewlett Packard, from Dell, and so on. Take a look at this. I will do this Okay, the video will do it, without the storage and with no downtime at all. Okay, let's go to the second one. It's the same virtual machine, I think, yes, okay. And I will do a live migration to another node, okay. This is a normal live migration. It's faster in Windows Server 2012, much faster than before. Okay. You just lose one ping, one packet, if you take a look down here, during the move from the first node of the cluster to the second. But actually this is a cluster with no storage, with just a file server. This is what Microsoft calls serve nothing live migration. Okay, you don't need expensive technology for this. Okay, and I will move it back to the original location. The node is server 2. It's the second node of the cluster. I will move it again to server 1. Okay, I will lose one network packet. The users that are connected to this virtual machine will not understand anything. Okay, they will continue to work as normal. And another scenario here is move the virtual machine storage to a cluster storage with no downtime. So, I didn't have a storage before, now we bought a storage in the company. It's a good idea to move all these virtual machines from the file server that we were using to a real storage. And you can do this again with no virtual machine downtime. This is the third one. So, let's check again the settings of this virtual machine. As before, it's located on the file server that I'm using. I will right click on this virtual machine and I will move the virtual machine storage only. This is my real cluster. This is my cluster storage. Okay, I just drag and drop the virtual machine to the cluster and that's it. Okay, the virtual machine will be moved to the cluster without without downtime at all. And now it's moved on the cluster storage. Okay, all these are scenarios that you can do it very easily. Let's see if I think I have one more. And the last one is the Hyper-V replica, as I told you, the killer feature of Windows Server 2012. For this demo, first of all, I will need 4 volunteers. Okay, and I will select randomly 1, 2, 3, and 4. Can you please come up with me? Just to explain you a little bit how the Hyper-V replica works. Okay, don't be worried, don't worry. Okay, so you are the first Hyper-V server. You should stand here. Okay. You are the second Hyper-V server. You will stay here. And imagine that this is my main site and this is my disaster recovery site. Okay. You will be my first virtual machine. As soon as I start the replication, okay, this virtual machine will be copied. You are the copy of the virtual machine. This virtual machine will be copied slowly. No, it's the opposite, sorry. You have to stand here and change places. Okay. You are the original virtual machine. Please raise your hands. Here is the original virtual machine, and here's the copy, because I will create a copy with a Hyper-V replica. So this is the copy, and this copy will be moved to the second Hyper-V server. Okay. As soon as I lose this first Hyper-V server. You can go to your seats now. You are lost. Okay, thank you very much. These two guys will remain here. He's my Hyper-V replica server, and he's the copy of the virtual machine. This guy will start servicing the clients. Okay, now you can go back to your seats. Thank you guys very much. Let's apply these Hyper-V servers and virtual machines. Okay, so let's take a look at this. This is the Hyper-V replica scenario. You just start the replication. First you have to enable it. Okay, who is the replica server? I have to specify my remote replica server. This is my DR replica server. Okay. It will try to connect to this server just to verify that we have connection. You use for the replication the HTTP protocol, as simple as this. Or if you want to use something more secure, you should go for certificate authentication with HTTPS. Okay. I will replicate these VHD files. Do you want to replicate only the latest recovery point or 4 recovery points? So in order to have, let's say, more instances of this virtual machine. And replicate every 3 hours. You've seen this. You can schedule the replication. Okay. Send the initial copy over the network, or maybe this virtual machine is too big to send it over the network. Send it by using an external media. Okay. Start replication immediately, or start it by using a schedule if you want. Okay. The replication will start. Okay, it's enabled successfully. It's a good idea to go to the settings because you have to check the network settings of this replica virtual machine. If you go to the settings, you can see that this virtual machine is not connected to any network. Then you can go and specify the failover TCP/IP settings. So if you replicate and you start this virtual machine, what is the network that you want this virtual machine to be connected? Okay, so you can fully customize the network settings of this replica virtual machine. Okay, the replication is started now, sending initial replica, 70%. It will take some time, depending on how big is the VHD file and the virtual machine that you want to replicate. As soon as you finish with the initial replication, you can go and check the failover scenario. Okay, so replication enabled. My primary server is server 1 and my replica is server 5. So now you can go to this server. Let's see. Okay, again, you can see that the replica server is server 5. This guy, you remember the remote Hyper-V server. And if you go to server 5, you can start, you can check the replication. Okay, let's see. Replication, planned failover. You can check the replication health, everything is normal. Okay. What is the size of the replicated data? Okay. Less than 5 minutes ago the replication was done. So if you right click and check the planned failover to see if things work correctly, check that the virtual machine is turned off, check configuration for allowing reverse replication because my replica server will become the primary server after the replication. If you start the failover, you will see that the virtual machine has to be turned off because this is the real scenario. What happens if I need a replication site? My original virtual machine has to be down. So the second virtual machine will start. You cannot start both of them at the same time. So you have to go and turn off the original virtual machine and try
the replication, the planned failover replication again. Okay, reverse the replication direction. Virtual machine on server 5 has been started successfully. Remember, you do not have the original virtual machine, it's down, so we need to start the replica virtual machine, the copy that we've created. Okay, and now this copy is started and you can connect to this virtual machine. Okay, so this is the Hyper-V replica feature. And let's go back to our slides. We have some few more things to cover. Online backup. Okay, so usually in Windows Server 2012 you can go and install the Windows backup feature. Again, is a feature, it's not installed by default, you have to go and install it through Server Manager. But now you have the option to use Windows Azure. What is Windows Azure? Let's say it's the cloud storage space of Microsoft. So by paying a subscription, you can download the agent of Windows Azure Online Backup and do your backups to Azure, do them on the cloud. Okay, the only thing that you need to go and set up and actually pay the subscription. I don't have an internet connection here to show you. I just will try to show you this by using my Windows Server Backup. Where is it? Just type it, Windows Server Backup. The only thing that I can show you here without a real internet connection is this. Usually I do local backups, but if you want, you can go and start your online backup subscription. If you press the continue button, you are redirected to a Microsoft website. Then you can log on with your live ID, you pay for the subscription, you download the agent, you install it on this server, and you can go as usual and schedule the backup. Only that this is not a local backup, this is a backup to the cloud. Well, it will depend on the upload speed of your internet connection, of course. Okay, but let's say if you want to go and back up small pieces of data, it's a good thing to do. Okay. Windows 2008 R2 Direct Access. Do you remember this? Have you ever heard of this? Well, now I'm talking about Windows 2000 R2 because Direct Access, it was really complicated and difficult to install it and use it on 2008 R2. You had to use certificates, you had to use special routers, you had to use public IPs and more than 2 in some cases. Okay, it was very difficult to install it. But what is this? As soon as you have internet connection, you are automatically connected to your company's network. You don't need VPN anymore. Okay. So, do you think this is a useful thing to do? Now I'm traveling, I have this laptop, I'm connected to my company's network, I can receive group policy updates, I can receive also Windows updates from my Windows Server Update Services server. The administrator can control my laptop, even if I'm continuously on the road. But as a user, I can go and use my company's resources just by using the same way. Take a look at this. I'm connected. I'm going to show you this live now. I'm connected to my company's Direct Access server. Okay, so what are the interesting things that I can do? First of all, I can check I'm connected remotely because now I'm out of the office. My computer is correctly configured for single-site direct access. And the good thing is this. I can go and let's say get a file from my file server by using the NetBIOS name I'm using when I'm in the office. So I just need to click OK here. This is my actual file server at the office, just by using a NetBIOS name here. Okay. I can ping my file server by using my NetBIOS name. Now take a look at this. You can see that I'm pinging my domain name .local, okay? But the only connection I have is an IP version 6 connection. I cannot ping these servers by using IP version 4 anymore. So practically I can connect from the outside world to every computer in my network that uses IP version 6. Okay, and I could go and let's say run a gp update /force. Have you ever used this command? Yes, of course. Take a look at this. I don't have a VPN connection. I have only a direct access connection. Let's see if this will work. And since we wait for this, I can show you. Do you remember what you can do to find out to which domain controller you are authenticated as a domain user? Group policy update has completed successfully. And meanwhile, I can go and run this command. Okay. Do you know this command? It will show me the domain controller that I'm authenticated as a user. But I'm outside of my network. It doesn't matter. I'm still a user. I'm still logged on to the domain controller remotely. Okay. So if you click on this, you can see that this domain controller actually authenticated you as a user. You have an always-on connection to your company's network. Okay. As soon as you have an internet connection, you are in the company. Okay, and of course I could go and double click and browse my file server and just copy something to my desktop. Okay. The good thing about direct access is everything is configured by using group policies. So you don't need to go to the computer and configure anything. Okay. If this computer is part of the domain, it will get the group policies and the direct access connection will be there automatically. Okay, so let's take a look at this direct access connection. I will use this server to install the role. The actual role that you need to install is the remote access role. Okay, and if you go on, you will arrive to this screen. Okay. Direct access and VPN, the routing and remote access server feature actually is the same thing. Okay, I will install both of them on this server. Okay. And you will see that after the installation, you have the option to, it's finished already, open the Getting Started wizard, okay, and you have the option to select direct access and VPN, or only direct access, or only VPN if you want. Okay, here you are. This is the Getting Started wizard. Deploy both direct access and VPN. This is the recommended setting. Why do you think it's the recommended setting? Because if you want to use direct access, your clients have to use the Windows 7 or Windows 8 Enterprise version. Okay. It will not work with the professional versions. It will not work with the Windows 8, let's say the simple version. It will not work with the Windows 8, the professional version. You have to use the enterprise version of Windows 7 or Windows 8. So, for all these clients that don't have the required operating system, we will let them use, let's say, the traditional VPN. But for everybody else, they can use direct access. I'm going to deploy direct access now. And here is the first step of the wizard. You have to decide if this is, let's say, something like a proxy server, you should go for the edge topology. If this is behind an edge device with 2 network adapters, you should select the second one. Even if you have a single server with just 1 network adapter behind your firewall in your company, you can select the last one. This is the simplest scenario, and this is what I'm going to do now. So I'm going to check this to select this one, and the next thing is to type the public name or the IPv4 address that you use in your network. Do you use static IP addresses? You have to use at least one for direct access. What is the public IP address that you use in your company? You just type it there, or you just type the name. So I'm going to type something like this: public.internet.com. Let's assume that this is my public IP address. Okay. So, remote access settings will be applied. It's a good idea to click on this link just to check the settings. What are the different settings that will be applied to my network? So, the first thing, 2 group policy settings that contain everything, all the configuration that your servers and your clients need. Okay, so important, this is the important group policy object setting for my computers. Okay, what are the remote clients? It's a good idea to remove this group and add your own group. So practically you have to create a computer group in Active Directory, add all the laptops computers that you want to use direct access, and add this group here, because these group policy settings will be applied to the group that you specify here. And you should uncheck or check this one, enable direct access for mobile computers only. This is actually a WMI filtering group policy. If you are a laptop, the settings will be applied to you. The group policy settings will be applied to your computer. If you are a desktop computer, you will never receive the direct access settings. It depends on what you want to do. Okay, so we just click next here, and it's a good idea to go and type here the network connectivity system will run on direct access kind computers. Okay, you should type the name of the connection. This is why I have this name here, workplace connection. It's the same, or you can type your company's name. Okay, and as a resource, you could go and type an internal URL in your company. So, sorry, http file server.contoso.local, for example. Why? Because your client computer will check if the client computer is connected to the internal network. It will be able to see this web page by using HTTP. If the client is connected to the outside of the company's network, he will not be able to see this web page. So now direct access will have to be in effect. As soon as you finish with this, I will not do it now, you have to go to the next setting about the remote access server. This is the actual public name that we used earlier. If you click next, this is the network adapter that is connected to the internal network. You just check it if it's the correct one. Usually it is the correct one. So practically you skip all these wizards by clicking next, next, next. You just check the settings. And do you want to use a certificate for IP HTTPS connections? Because all these direct access connections will use HTTPS. Okay, the good thing here is you can use a self-signed certificate. This certificate will be automatically created by direct access. If you want to use your own certificate, you can do it. But let's say for a very simple scenario, you can use the self-signed certificate. Okay. And the last step of the wizard is to check the infrastructure servers. Usually we accept the default setting. Okay, this is my direct access server, and this is a special entry in DNS. The client will also check to connect to this computer here in order to realize if it's in the outside of the company's network or if he's in the network. Okay, as soon as you finish with this, it will create DNS entries, group policies. Group policy settings will be applied to the computers. Okay, you can take a look, get an idea of the settings that direct access does. And keep in mind that in Windows Server 2008 you had to do all these things manually, step by step. Now everything is done through this simple wizard. Okay. The last time I tried to install direct access on Windows Server 2008 R2, it took me 3 days and I didn't manage to install it. And now with Windows Server 2012, I did it in 5 minutes. It's very, very simple. Okay, we'll leave this wizard running. The actual result is this one. You can just browse the network as soon as you have an internet connection. Okay, let's close this one. Let's click cancel. Let's go back to our slides. For the last topic of today, okay, this is the direct access, and this is the last one. Virtualized domain controllers. Okay, Microsoft's suggestion about virtualization of domain controllers was this one. Keep at least one physical domain controller. Okay, visualize everything else, but keep just one domain controller as a physical machine. Snapshots were not allowed. You should not use snapshots on domain controllers because you could have problems with USN rollback. USN rollback and lingering objects was the nightmare of Active Directory. Okay. If you use snapshots, what happens is this. I get a snapshot of the first domain controller, I have a snapshot of the second one, and somehow I bring to the network an oldest version of my Active Directory by reverting back to the snapshot. If you do this, your domain controllers will lose the communication. They cannot understand who has the correct database and who has the old database. And after a while, the netlogon service will not start with domain controllers, and practically your clients will not be able to log on. And you have to go and find what are the objects that you have to go and delete in order to synchronize again these two different databases. Now, Active Directory has a new flag, has a new, let's say, a setting called VM Generation ID. Even if you virtualize domain controllers, sorry, even if you snapshot the domain controllers, Active Directory knows what to do in every case. So you can easily go and snapshot the domain controllers now. Another thing that you can do is you can clone your domain controllers. Copy an entire domain controller and create new domain controllers very, very easily. Okay, but you have to keep in mind that you can copy only, you can clone only Windows Server 2012 DC domain controllers. You have to use a virtualization platform that supports the VM generation ID that we've talked earlier, and this is what Hyper-V does. And what we practically do is we export the virtual domain controller and we import the virtual domain controller to the same Hyper-V server or to a different Hyper-V server if you like. But what will happen about SIDs, network settings, computer names? You cannot have two identical computers in the same network. And this is the procedure. The first thing you have to do is you have to go to your domain controller, even if it's a virtual machine, and you have to go and check to Device Manager, System Devices, for this thing here. Okay. So you have to go to the domain controller that you want to this is the wrong thing to do. So you have to go to Device Manager. Okay. Go to System Devices, and here you are. This is what you need to check. So the domain controller that has this object can be easily cloned, and you can easily go and create new virtual machines, new virtual domain controllers. The next thing to check. Add the domain controller account to the domain controller that you want to clone to the clonable domain controllers group. Okay, so in Active Directory now, we have a new group. So if we go to Active Directory users and computers, you can go and find this group. It should be somewhere here. Let's see, and here you are. So let's say you want to create a clone of DC1, you have to make DC1 a member of this group. I did this already, okay, so DC1 is now a member of my clonable domain controllers group. The next thing to do is to go and create, by using PowerShell, you should run the get ADDC cloning excluded application list minus generate XML. Why is this? Because maybe this domain controller has some applications that cannot be cloned, like the HCP. What happens if you create an exact copy of the HCP? You cannot have both the HCPs running. You should go and change a little bit the configuration. So this command will create an XML file with all the applications that are not compatible with domain controller cloning, like the HCP. Okay, this XML file will be stored in the NTDS folder in the domain controller. And you should go and run the command let the dclone config.xml file again with PowerShell. This will create the computer name and the network settings that you want to use for the new domain controller. Okay, let me show you this very, very quickly because we are out of time. So these are the two XML files that I have already. So I have to go to my Windows NTDS folder. Okay. This is the file that I've created with all the settings of the new domain controller. This will be the name of the new domain controller. This will be the IP address, and mask, default gateway, and DNS servers. So as soon as you clone this domain controller, it will get these settings. Okay. And the second XML file that I've created is this one. What are the applications that are not compatible with cloning? The DHCP server. Okay. So as soon as you clone this domain controller, the DHCP server will be off, with the service will be stopped. Okay, and you have to go and configure it again. The command, if you want to create this clone configuration file, is this one. Okay. So the first thing is you need to go and run this to generate a list of the applications that cannot be cloned. And the second one is this one, new ADDC clone config file. You give the new name that you want to use for this domain controller, the IP address, gateway, subnet mask, and so on, and the DNS servers that you want to use for this new virtual machine. And the next step is to actually run the command. Take a look at this. This is the new ADDC clone config file. Okay, it will do some tests. It will check that this domain controller you want to clone is the PDC FISMO role. It will check that the local domain controller is a member of the clone domain controllers group. It will check that you have no excluded applications. There was one, DHCP, but I've included this application already in the XML file that I've created. And now I'm ready to start the cloning. The cloning can be done like this. You just shut down the domain controller that you want to clone. You export and import the virtual machine. Keep in mind, you should create a new unique ID for the new virtual domain controller when you import it on the same Hyper-V server. So practically, when you do the import command, you have to do something like this. I have to turn off my first domain controller. Actually, we'll shut down everything here. Okay. You just export this domain controller to a new folder. I will call this clone PC. Okay. You do the export. It will take some time. I just will show you what to do when you start the import. When you import the virtual machine, you have to go to the specific folder. Let's try this one. Oh, come on. I have to wait for the other one to finish. Okay. Just remember this one. We have no time to show you this. Actually, I'm finished already. When you import the new virtual machine, select to create a new unique ID. Another option that you have in Hyper-V is to keep the original ID, but you do not want this because you want this to be a new virtual machine. Okay, as soon as you finish with the import, you start both domain controllers and you let them finish the process. Okay, and by using this, you can clone, you can create the third, the fourth domain controller in case you want to create additional ones. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for coming. Enjoy the rest of the show. Thank you.